Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to an incredibly special edition of Wowhead Weekly. We are so excited this week to be joined by two of WoW's lead encounter designers, lead game designers. Ian's no longer a lead encounter designer, and Cory never was, so that's a good start. But first of all, I wanted to introduce you to my co-host extraordinaire and Wowhead site manager, Peculiar. How are you doing this week, Perk? How's it going?
This is a great way to cap off this entire patch. We've had so much increased traffic, so much interest in our guides and new data.
Totally.
So this is very exciting. Really looking forward to this.
Exactly that. All right, and with no further ado, let's bring it to the three panel and introduce Ian Hazzikostas and Cory Stockton. Guys, how are you feeling today? How's it all going? Stressed? Tired?
All of the above, but excited. Excited to be here, and yeah, happy to talk to you guys.
It's
Fantastic.
been a very busy week.
Oh man, I can't even. It's been a crazy busy week. And actually that leads me well into our first questions. We wanted to start, obviously, patch 6.2 has fired off just recently, and there's been a few sort of, let's call them teething problems, some slight issues with the stat squish, and those are causing some concerns. And relating, obviously, we've seen a bunch of hotfixes coming out, so we know that you guys are dealing with this. So just give us some idea of what's been going on. Is it just simply the magnitude of the change which you're pulling off here that's causing these teething problems to occur?
To some extent. I mean, I think there's no question that I think you can make the argument that this expansion or this pre-expansion patch has changed more in terms of like the player-facing experience than any expansion patch we've ever had in the past. Mm-hmm. It's maybe rivaled by the Cataclysm pre-patch, which, you know, changed the whole outdoor world. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the same as, you know, affecting the core stats, the core interaction of a player with content they were just doing a week prior. So we knew a whole lot was changing. We tried to get in front of a lot of it on the beta. But the reality is, you know, we could have done a better job, but we're paying attention to feedback, to data, to all of our other metrics, and just trying to put out all these little fires as they pop up. Part of the point of the whole pre-expansion patch as well is to make sure that these kinks all get ironed out well in advance of the actual launch of Warlords of Draenor and people going into Draenor, you know. Better that it's of course never good for someone to, let's say, loot a mythic item in Siege of Orgrimmar and then log in the next day and find that it's now a normal mode item.
Oh, the item mode system.
Not great. But better for us to find that problem now and fix it rather than, you know, a month and a half from now when it's a high mall item.
Yeah, I think a couple of the guys in our leads meeting this morning put it best that this week coming in on patch day, it really feels like you're walking into an operating room. Because it's just, you know, everyone's on incredibly high alert. We're getting, you know, email updates every hour on specifically what's going on, who's on what hotfix, where it's going. And it's just like that nonstop until things settle down. But like Ian said, really the point of why we launch early like this is to make sure that when launch day hits, that we've got as many of these issues ironed out as we can.
Yeah, patch day and patch week in general are always a fun time around the office.
Yeah.
We kind of start off, you know, on the operations side, they have a whole war room set up where they're just keeping track of everything. But we all came in at around 6 in the morning on this past Tuesday. While the servers weren't yet open to the public, we're basically acting as guinea pigs.
Yep.
We're hopping on so that if something hot happens that's going to break one of our characters horribly, if we're going to like lose all our achievements or have
make
our
sure
items
that
destroyed,
your mail is there.
Exactly.
Things like that.
That's a thing that's happened.
That's
once.
totally happened.
All mail got lost. So it'll be our characters that break instead of yours. But yeah, really just it starts and then just keeps going from there.
Yep.
Following up on that, there's been a lot of concern about leveling content being harder, as well as soloing old content having great variations in difficulty. We've seen that there was a big hotfix to creature health, but are you still monitoring this and looking to make future improvements in future hotfixes?
Definitely monitoring this.
Yep.
I think that the level up content in particular, I think those issues are pretty much fully resolved at this point. A lot of people, I think, initially pointed to the stat squish or the item squish, whatever you want to call it, as the culprit there. In reality, it was actually a more complex interaction of a whole bunch of different things. And I think while ideally we would have gotten the numbers right the first time around, what happened was we made a number of really sweeping systems changes this time. There was the item squish, but there was also doubling all of player health across the board and adjusting creature damage to compensate. There was also rebuilding the way that all player spells scale. It used to be that, you know, Frostbolt did like 1,000 damage plus X% of your spell power. Now it's just a percentage of your spell power. There's no more base points on spells. In addition to, you know, pruning, rotation changes, all of those things combined that had very disparate impacts at different levels that were harder than we anticipated to boil down to a single number, but we think we've got it in a good place now.
I wouldn't say that we thought it was going to be perfect day one, obviously. We knew
There's
that
so many
change.
changes.
Yeah, the change was just so dramatic. I think we knew that was something we were going to have to look out for. And so that was a hot issue, obviously, going into it. But it's definitely something that we'll be keeping an eye on moving forward.
Yeah, this ties in really well to our next question, and I know Olivia has more specifics on it. People have been raising concerns about class balance and associated changes in the pre-patch. How are you responding to those concerns, and what are you prioritizing right now, given that the level 90 content is only around for a few weeks before we all, level up and hit 100 and go into Warlords with more ability modifications?
And yeah, I mean, long term, our focus in terms of class balance on beta and in Warlords in general has been to the level 100 game.
Yeah.
That said, we're definitely keeping a close eye on outliers at level 90.
Mm-hmm.
While we can't promise, and we're actually honestly not going to try to achieve 100% perfect parity at level 90 in Siege of Orgrimmar, it's not acceptable for there to be huge variations where, let's say, a Fury Warrior is doing 80% more damage than a Survival Hunter. So I think what we're going to see in coming days are some targeted class adjustments. I think Celestalon tweeted about these recently. We're looking probably to bring down the really high-end outliers like Fire and Fury, maybe Demonology Warlock a little bit, and then bring up the people that are really kind of at the bottom of the pack, like Hunters, Retribution Paladins, maybe Feral Druid, maybe Windwalker Monk, and try to get everybody to more of a happy medium. And then really most of our attention is going to be making sure Warlords balance is as good as possible.
Yeah, and that makes an absolute ton of sense to me as well. Like, it's only for a few weeks. This is very much in preparation and kind of almost a testing phase for you guys.
Yep.
I was kind of curious, like, we've obviously talked about how 6.0.2 is extremely different to Myst because we've got all of these changes in. But as we've seen playing at level 100 on the beta, it's also very, very different to Warlords of Draenor. And I'm just kind of wondering how the players should view this. What should they be taking away from how the game is playing right now with reference to Warlords of Draenor coming in future?
I mean, honestly, clearly not every little kink is representative of what you're going to see at level 100. That said, I think we're trying, and we've been trying with most of our changes, to err on the side of making things maybe a little bit easier than they used to be. I think where we came down initially, I think on day one, on Tuesday and Wednesday, Siege of Orgrimmar was probably in many ways more challenging than it was before 6.0 hit. That was never our intention. At this point, honestly, if your guild was stuck on a certain boss that you couldn't get past, or if you've mostly done, let's say, Raid Finder raiding, and you want to try dipping your toe into now normal mode through our pre-made group finder to get your heirloom, I think you should find that you'll have an easier time with this content, and you can just kind of, in the waning days of Pandaria, before we all move to Draenor, kind of experience things you maybe didn't get a chance to, get some new items for your character, and just kind of get ready for the leveling experience.
I think it gives you a chance to get associated with the changes. Also, for a number of people, right, that have been playing all the way up to this point, the changes aren't going to feel as dramatic, but for people that might have just came back and haven't played for a while directly to the pre-patch, the changes are going to feel bigger, right? So that period of time gives them a chance to get associated with what's going on, and kind of, it's almost like a warm-up period, right, to get ready for Warlords to actually launch.
Right, I mean, even if you're a boosted character, you have to unlock your abilities by actually questing in the Blasted Lands. You can't just go in there off the deep end.
You do, and a lot of players at that point, they want to get everything set up, they want to get prepared, there might be a few things they want to have ready to go. So I think this period of time, it's really a chance for that to all happen before, everything kind of goes crazy when the game actually launches.
Absolutely, and I think it's a really good thing for people to get their eye in, so to speak, before they start leveling. One specific concern that's been brought to us, obviously we've reached out for questions for you guys and people have been very responsive. Healers and tanks are particularly kind of feeling the squeeze, so to speak, here with the alterations to their gameplay, mana mechanics, that sort of thing. Do you have any sort of words of reassurance for those guys moving into Warlords? Is it going to get better? Is it going to change? How is healing and tanking looking between now and Warlords of Draenor?
Yeah, do you essentially have to relearn what you're doing?
Yeah. Is it relearning twice?
You shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
I think, so a lot of those concerns, I think, were born out of the experience in the first couple of days when damage was often spikier and higher overall than we intended it to be. And you were having the experience of, going to run a dungeon even, and as a tank, you couldn't keep yourself alive, whereas a healer, it felt like you couldn't keep the tank alive. And you're saying, oh, wow, clearly, something terrible has happened.
Changes are totally wrong.
Healing and tanking mechanics. It's like, no, actually, the mobs are probably doing 40% more damage than they should have been. That's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know that we're seeing that exact experience anymore. I think the gist of our changes with healers and tanks, really, we didn't change healing mechanics so much as we just increased player health pools significantly. Healing is about as strong as it used to be. Players just have larger health pools. Now that means, of course, it's going to take longer to bring someone from 20% health to 100% health, but it's also conversely going to take longer to bring them from 100 down to 20 in terms of damage. We wanted to slow down the spikiness of both damage and healing a little bit, and that's both for encounters and for PvP. Healers should hopefully find that they have actually a bit more time to react to the things that are going on around them. That it's not about, oops, you missed a heal, and so the person just died before you could react, but, oh, okay, I'm falling behind. Let me switch to flash heal instead of heal, or let me use a cooldown and try to catch back up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a case of people are just going to have to get used to the way that healing and tanking are working now. Like, it is not an emergency situation if everyone in your group isn't at 100% health, because that spiky boss damage isn't going to come in and fire away. And moving on to the, we're having a great time in the opening scenario with Ubers and everything. Perk, I know you had a question about that.
Yeah, so I really like the Blasted Lands and UBRS pre-event that we have. It's, it feels way more detailed than what we saw from Mist of Pandaria with just the Theramore scenario. Can you shed any insights into what the concept was behind this intro, and just any reasons for having this more elaborate, awesome event?
There's a couple things. I think we also felt like it would have been nice to do more with Mist. The Theramore event set up storylines in a way that we wanted, but many people came into it having no clue why that was even happening.
Yeah,
it kind of picked up from a book, right?
Not,
Clearly, that's something that didn't work out as well as we wanted. So we wanted to do something here, definitely that would pull you right into the story of Warlords, kind of right away. And I don't think there was anything better than using the Dark Portal, having the Iron Horde come over, and you kind of get an experience, a little taste of essentially what's going to happen before. So number one, we liked that it could happen, right off the bat. Anyone that comes into it would get the storyline, but also by using an existing zone space like that, it gave us a chance to build a larger experience, right? So we've got more of our, kind of spawning that players would expect from like a normal POI. And wow, it's not necessarily just a scenario experience. It's a series of quests with drops and sub-bosses and things like that. So I think it can feel more familiar to many players too, coming back. Whereas some players in Myst might have, they didn't even know what a scenario was. It was all new UI, a whole new thing.
Yeah, the new words are a bit, like vignettes and scenarios that can take time.
Exactly. This, I think, just feels more like a smaller zone experience, but with a very focused story.
Yeah, and even UBRS, it can help warm people up to the changes coming up in Warlords of Draenor, how it's the complete revamp. And it's really nice to see additions like the, old loot with new names or stuff all be coming back and helping you out. It's nice to have those old touches so it doesn't feel like a huge shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in some ways, we knew, a lot of people would be coming back to check out the expansion, using their boosts, whether, to get their first 90 ever or to switch to an alt. And so we wanted to make sure that we were putting them into some content that felt relevant to Draenor and to the thing they were coming back for, the thing they were looking forward to, as opposed to, okay, you boosted, well, now do Timeless Isle. Like, Timeless Isle feels very 1 year ago.
Yes, it does.
And so I would say the Blasted Lands experience is more catered towards the kind of the boosted player. It's tuned around that. If you've done it on a raid geared character that was playing through 5.4, you pretty much stomp on everything. UBRS, on the other hand, was the piece of content that was more for people who had, some Timeless Isle, some Raid Finder, or better gear to kind of give them some relevant upgrades and some more relevant content that was tuned for that.
Exactly, and it's a dungeon. It's a new dungeon, which we're so excited about, and we know that there's a lot more new dungeons coming in Warlords. Speaking of new things, we are at Wowhead very into our holidays, and we are really, 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 really excited about the Hallows End updates coming this weekend. We have put together a huge guide, and we're just so stoked about the new holiday update and some changes there. Can we expect to see other holiday updates coming in Warlords? Is that a project that you're undertaking for this expansion?
Yeah, I think where possible, we're looking to go back and add some new rewards, add little bits of new gameplay, new stuff to the Darkmoon Fair, things along those lines, just to keep it fresh, just to give players who in many cases have been doing these holidays for years something new to look forward to, something new to experience when it comes around.
For sure.
Absolutely. And what's kind of made you start updating them at this point? I know that players have been asking for them for a long time. Is it you just had the time or some other reason?
Yeah, like there's so many regular updates in Cataclysm, and then in Mob we saw Darkmoon Fair, which is awesome, and Brawlers Guild, but the holidays didn't get a ton of love.
I think it just really comes down to where we're going to focus our time. And so like this time we had extra time to put into the holidays specifically. And like you said, since they didn't get many updates for Pandaria, we felt like it was a good time to go in and do, you know, a little bit of house cleaning across the board on all the holidays. And it's not giant things, but it's things I think that would get a player to come back and look at that holiday again, because there's a new reward or there's a new kind of small system. There might be a couple new quests, but the whole thing isn't completely changed, but it's enough that it should feel fresh. That's really the goal there.
Are there any teasers you can share? I mean, on Wowhead, we have ideas like it would be cool if a follower was from a holiday, or if there was more transmog gear from a holiday. And we've data mined some pets, but is there anything that you think is really cool that's coming with the new holidays that you want to tell us about?
I mean, I can tell you about a couple ideas. We have, like, one of the things we've talked about all along was if we would support holidays in the Garrison. So, for example, when it's Christmas or whatever, could we have, or any of the holidays, could we have decorations appear in the Garrison? So it's something that we're still talking about now. That is that something we could do moving forward for, you know, the whole time during Warlords, that you could have that happen there. I think we all think that would be a really cool thing to do, to find ways to integrate that. So it's definitely something that we've talked about that's on the table. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do it yet, but it's definitely a cool thing that we think would be awesome.
Awesome. That's really cool. So we want to talk about some expansion features that are coming on. And I know that one interview that you wanted to touch on in the Convert to Raid interview was about itemization. So there are many changes in the way that loot works in Warlords of Draenor, including new random elements. And while we here at Wowhead are super familiar with all the itemization since we're regularly working and fixing the data, there are some concerns that we're getting something like Diablo. Some other players think that. Are there some misconceptions that people have about randomly chosen stats, and can you clarify this a bit for everyone watching in?
Yes, of course, the Diabloification of WoW. So I think random stats itself is a little bit of a misnomer. I think, just to be clear, one very core fundamental difference that makes our loot totally different from any type of the Diablo experience is, you know, just the fact that items have fixed stats. Items, you know, they have specific names. When you go look at the raid drops available from Highmall, from Blackrock Foundry, there are gloves with haste and crit on them. That's not random. Nothing is random about that. You have specific items you're going for.
Stats.
Exactly. Now, what we're basically doing is extending what we saw as a successful implementation of the Warforged system in Siege of Orgrimmar. And so there's Warforged, items can have a bonus socket, and items can have a tertiary stat, which generally isn't, like, it's not a throughput increase. We made specific efforts to make sure that's not, you know, increasing your core DPS. They're just nice little perks, nice little advantages to have. I think the goal here is to keep the experience of running the zone and killing a boss potentially interesting as you're working on later parts of the raid. You know, we make larger raid zones. Many guilds are going to spend months progressing through them. And one of the problems that we've found in the past is, you know, you are working on trying to kill, I don't know, Shah of Fear, or you're working on trying to kill Lei Shen. And, you know, at this point, by the time you're on him, you've probably killed Jinrock, you've probably killed the first couple of bosses a dozen or more times. There aren't a whole lot of upgrades you still need from them. And so you have this experience of, like, all right, time to slog through the farm bosses so I can actually get to the stuff that might actually give my character some upgrades. And with, you know, the possibility of these random variations, there is this chance to get an upgrade, but at the same time, it's not, you know, when you go into the next tier, you're going to replace that item regardless. You know, the fact that you did or didn't get a Warforged item in Highmall isn't going to change what you do months down the line, and there shouldn't be this obligation to go back and farm it when you otherwise wouldn't have. It's just giving you extra rewards for something you were already going to do.
Yeah, I think that there's obviously a risk there of people feeling that obligation regardless of whether there's a design intent for it or not. Do you think that there is sort of a greater risk of players burning out with the feeling that they have to grind things, and that's the bunny ears there on the have to, or is it like the sort of the pros outweigh the cons on this for you guys?
There's always that tension, right? There's always, like...
It's always a danger.
Right. If something isn't rewarding, then it's pointless. And if it is rewarding, it's mandatory. And what's the gray area in between? And I think, really, just to use Mist's example, since they may be more familiar, I think when, you know, imagine you'd had the system all through Mists. When you were running Throne of Thunder, which you were going to do, which basically every serious raiding guild did, you're just kind of doing your weekly farm clears. You would have been getting some more upgrades that you would have felt good about, as opposed to going in thinking, like, okay, there's this one trinket that I still need. Then you get to the boss that drops it, it doesn't drop, and now you're like, okay, guess I'm not getting anything this week. But the second Siege of Orgrimmar came out, you stop Throne of Thunder. There's no reason to keep doing old content when you wouldn't have previously. So it's not really going to induce burnout or change player behavior on that level. It's just going to make things a little bit more interesting, and it also potentially makes the choice about what item to wear more interesting. It's not necessarily strictly about, okay, Icy Veins or whatever, Wowhead, whatever site says, these are the best items for me to wear, this is my best in slot list, I'm going to go after this pair of gloves. Well, okay, this other pair of gloves doesn't have crit on it, but I got a Warforged socketed version of it. Well, now actually that's an upgrade for me. I'm going to take this instead. And there's some value from just getting away from itemization as completing a checklist and more into an organic feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another concern that we've heard coming out a lot is that there's a feeling that the random augmentations, even when fully understood by people, as thank you so much for clarifying those a bit more, they might cause raids that get lucky or unlucky to do noticeably different amounts of DPS and have noticeably different successes. What's actually the real impact of these sort of random elements of gearing on raid teams' DPS and such like?
Yeah, because even though the tertiary stats don't really increase DPS, the extra gem sockets can increase DPS.
Absolutely, and so can Warforged items and so forth. I think in reality, the more different random vectors you have to vary the rewards that you're getting, on average, the more alike different guilds are going to be. I think all of this pales in comparison to what we've already had and what we've had in the game for years and years, which is just basic drop luck, basic drop chances. I hear people complaining about, or worrying that maybe the world first race in some raid is going to be affected by who got more Warforged items or who got more socketed items. The impact of that is a fraction of a percent of DPS. Compare that to the impact of Guild A that gets 9 weapon drops and 5 trinkets during their first clear, and Guild B that gets 4 weapon drops and 2 trinkets in their first clear when they're going into Mythic or when they're going into the progression experience. That's actually like a double-digit percentage difference in some cases in terms of the DPS impact. And I don't think we've ever had a case where any guild felt, legitimately or otherwise, oh, we only lost the race because they got better drop RNG than we did. And this is a smaller impact than that.
Cool. We had a general question about itemization as well, tied to the item level growth. What do you expect to happen to the item level growth over the course of Warlords? Because we've seen item levels as high as 7, 10 already in the data with some of the epics for the legendary rings, which is a pretty big jump from the eye level 589 some top geared players are wearing right now. Is item level growth on the scale of concern? And this is also something that we touched upon when I interviewed you back in 5.2, that it was a challenge and missed with the escalation and upgrades providing a challenge. So where do you stand on that now?
I mean, I think ultimately the most important thing for us is that each tier of content, each additional difficulty feels like it offers meaningful rewards. And what we found is that something in the ballpark of 10 to 15 item levels is what you need. A 10 to 15% upgrade is what you need for a new item
feels good
to feel excited. Otherwise, you're like, okay, I just got, 2% more strength on this item, whoopee. We feel like the range of item levels that we have planned is comparable to what we've done in other expansions. And I think if you go and look back, it's been pretty routine for us to go from, add 90 or 100 item levels, going from dungeon gear to late game raid gear. And our system is just designed around that. And overall, we think it's worked out okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on into getting away from the item-specific stats, we have a ton of questions about garrisons, like literally a ton, and it's no surprise given that it's such a huge new feature. So first up, kind of a raiding garrison sort of linked question. Some people who are raiders are concerned about the addition of the raid loot to the item missions, the sort of raid levels gear to the missions in garrisons. And they kind of feel like, again, here's that mandatory word again, but it makes them mandatory even if they don't feel like they particularly want to do garrisons. You've said in the past that you want to minimize the feeling that they are required in any way. So what steps are you taking to ensure that players don't feel like they have to have a garrison, Cory?
Well, I think that comes into the way that those are tuned, right? So it's not like you can just, as soon as you build your garrison, that you're going to be able to start doing missions with followers that you found in the intro experience and somehow expect that you would get raid level stuff out of that. There's an entire progression behind the mission system, not only with those missions being made available to begin with to have the loot, but to actually have the followers that are at the right level and fit the right requirements to do those missions, right? So number one, there's a process there. I know that if someone sees that that item comes from missions, you could instantly think, oh, boom, that's like, yeah, I'm going to be able to get that right away. So there's that part. There's a ramp built into the system, but we've also designed it in a way that it should feel like an option, right? If you want to get those items through raiding, clearly go for it. That's great. Maybe you're not as much into raiding as someone, maybe you're into more doing solo world content at max level at 100, but you still want to feel like, you can be geared out pretty close to what people are getting from doing actual raiding. That's an option for those players, right? I think it opens that up. That's really the goal there, is to make it so that it feels like you can still attain high item levels in WoW without necessarily having to have raiding be the only way to do that. And that shouldn't take anything away from the raid game.
And I think that, the two other key things here are that the higher tier raid missions, unlocking them requires not just your garrison progression, but also what your own personal character has done as a raider.
Yep.
You can't get the heroic or mythic raid loot missions unless you've actually done a certain amount of actual normal or heroic or higher boss killing in High Mall. So those aren't going to be available right away. They're somewhat time gated. They're also relatively rare missions. It should feel like an exciting bonus when it pops up. And so if you look at it in terms of the sheer number of items you're getting across an entire week of clearing a zone, bonus rolling on bosses, and so forth, this is a drop in the bucket. It's designed to be super exciting for the person who doesn't have ready access to all the boss tables and that isn't going in with their guild and killing all the bosses every week. And really, it's not going to directly impact the progression race. And it's kind of tuned that way. But it's a very cool perk for everyone else.
Yeah, I had a few clarifications on that because I finally, on my beta character, I finally got one of the 645 item level missions. Inside the box, can you get all raid gear, or is it just going to be things like armor and not weapons or trinkets? And can you clarify a bit more how the game picks what raid difficulty loot box you get from that mission, for example? I haven't done any raids and I have this normal mode box, and could someone, get one hero kill and then be eligible for the box?
No, so it's I'm pretty sure no weapons. I think also no trinkets.
There's no weapons or trinkets.
That's sort of by design. And I forget the details off the top of my head, but it's a decent number of kills. It's not just go get one boss. It's at least a couple of weeks of progression in a given difficulty to be considered like, okay, you're now a heroic High Mall raider because you have done a certain amount. And
we actually scale some of that based on the number of bosses that you have killed, because like Ian said, there's a chance for that mission to come up. That's the way the mission system works, is it essentially does a roll, every day and looks at all these different conditions. That what has your character done? What missions are you eligible for?
Yeah, I finally got my first one this week, and I've been doing it every day pretty much, so it's been a while.
And the idea behind that is to really keep the system feeling fresh for a long time, right? We don't want it to be the kind of thing where you just go in, here's the list, boom, I'm going to work my way through. We want that moment of excitement when you go to the mission table, you open it, and you're like, oh, the rare mission's there, and you're super excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I definitely think it sounds like that's going to be how it sort of turns out. One thing we've seen a lot about garrisons is the talk of, particularly as we're getting closer and closer to Warlords, this notion of garrison theory crafting and kind of cookie cutter garrison builds, to use some old school terms there. Looking at the information in our garrison calculator, we are feeling like there's a lot more choice than people might anticipate. Is the cookie cutter build something you've considered? What steps are you guys taking to avoid it? Do you think it's a valid concern? What's going on there?
I mean, that's something we've clearly thought, or known that this would be something that would come up all along. I think any system that we put into WoW, we realize that at some point there's going to be a website that'll tell you the perfect way to do it. And, with garrisons, obviously it started out, it's grown over time. But I think you really nailed it when you mentioned how much depth that there is in those decisions and in the buildings. It's not really very clear until you're actually playing the game and you're seeing what they do for you. Because, to be honest, we can't put everything that a building specifically will do in a tooltip. These tooltips would read like books. There's a lot of cool... There's a lot of things that the buildings do that people are going to discover over time, I think, that are going to be personal decisions about, do I care about having racial guards? If you're really into having night elves be your guards and they ride around on night sabers and they're called sentinels, that's something that comes from the barracks building. So maybe that's more important to you than the perk that the barracks building even gives, right? So you might make that choice based on that, which is totally just a visual thing, but you might think it's awesome. There are tons of those kinds of things across the whole system, right? And it's not the kind of thing that we can necessarily just lay it all out for you. As you're playing, you're going to find those things, and those are going to totally influence your decisions.
Yeah, I think there are some things that may feel, depending on your playstyle, like clear-cut choices. Like if you're a hardcore PvPer, you probably are going to want to build the Gladiator Sanctum just because it unlocks this awesome PvP quest line that can culminate in a last man standing free-for-all that can get you some PvP gear. If you love collecting mounts, you'll probably want to build the stables because that gives you the ability to unlock some quests where you can go out and collect unique mounts. If you are a hardcore crafter and you're a blacksmith, you'll probably want to build a blacksmith. But those are all, that's actually diversity in some sense. That differentiates the garrisons of different players and helps your garrison be a reflection of your own play style and your approach to the game as a player, which we think is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've certainly built my Gladiator Sanctum. I've got all my bones together. I've leveled it up.
There's so many cool
man, there's so many cool things. Like the Gladiator Sanctum, if you haven't checked it out, people watching this, keep an eye on that. Check out the Wowhead Garrison Calculator. It is so cool. So just one thing that I think a lot of the theory crafting and cookie cutter stuff is coming from hardcore raiders. And Ian, I know that obviously as a hardcore raider yourself, I'm sure you guys have thought of this. But what is it specifically for hardcore raiders that, what are buildings that you feel like they might feel they have to do? And is it really valid that they have to do anything?
I don't think that we've necessarily, so a lot of them have an economic benefit. If you want a lot of gold, there's certainly that, but that can lie in a bunch of different buildings. The two that I guess I could think of, the armory. If you have a level 3 armory, that will let you get one of your bonus rolls each week for free. It's not an additional bonus roll. It's simply saving you some time. If you're doing tons of raiding and progression, and that's really where your focus is with the hours that you're logging in each week, and you don't want to feel, you don't want to have to worry about going out and getting Apexis crystals or whatever, that could save you some time. The barn gives you access to high-end feasts, which could be useful for raiding. I don't know if that's something everyone will need to have, but it's, the person providing the feasts for the raid group would benefit from it. We're looking at making some tweaks, by the way, to the relationship between cooking and the barn so that it's not like just strictly superior in every way, but rather on par with the best cooking options. But it's just
right now it's like
a more efficient way.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like initially going into the garrison, definitely when we talked about a lot of the buildings, we talked about doing things that were definitely more out of bounds than we've done previously, right? Like when we looked at stuff and said, okay, we're going to let you drive this vehicle around the world, wherever, for a limited period of time. That's something we wouldn't really have even have thought as an option in a lot of previous expansions. But I think we really looked at the garrisons as a chance to kind of let's think of a lot of things that we wouldn't necessarily always do. And obviously some of those we're going to have to look at as the game launches and it moves forward. And the food is something that we thought, well, this is kind of crazy. Let's give it a shot and see how it'll feel. Clearly, we're going to watch those things, and we're going to have to, make sure that they balance out over time so that something doesn't feel 100% required.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of players that are really interested in everything that the Garrison has to offer. They love all the Wowhead guides and coverage on it, but time is an issue. Can you explain some of the mechanics that let players enjoy the Garrisons without the sense that they're going to fall behind if they don't log in every day? I think there's some work order things or missions that I've noticed that have helped me when I'm busy. Explain some of them.
So really the goal for obviously I think we've made it feel like we want that to be a hub for you to go to, and start your play session there and decide, okay, let's say you're max level, right? That's where we're going to send you to our max level daily areas. And there's going to be a random selection there, so you'll show up, you can decide to go. The thing is, if you don't go that day, it's going to come back up a different day. Let's say Ashram pops one day, and you didn't get the chance to do it because you didn't log in. Oh, man, I'm so sad. That's going to come back up in the rotation. We've tried to build everything in there so that if you have to go on vacation, you let's just say you only play WoW a couple days a week, right? You could still get the full benefit of the garrison that anyone else could. That's the whole concept behind work orders, why you can send them off and you don't have to check on them right away, right? You can send off a large number of work orders and come back later and not have to necessarily check in all the time to know what's going on there. We wanted it to feel like something that, it wasn't the kind of thing where you have to, I'm constantly pinging back every 2 hours to my garrison to kind of know what's going on. There's shortcuts, right? There's followers that'll let you open a mission table out in the world, and then you can interact with your missions without having to go back to the garrison. Just little things like that kind of peppered across the whole system.
Yeah,
I mean, it's good also to remember things like you can hold on to your missions for a week, even the raiding ones. So it's not like, oh man, I missed this raiding mission. It's going to vanish now because I was busy raiding.
Exactly. And I think we found that with a lot of things, a weekly rather than daily structure gives players much more flexibility given their own personal schedules. I mean, we all have nights, no matter how much we love playing WoW, when we have other things to do or that we want to do, and we don't want it to feel like a sense of obligation. And I think it's difficult to understand without actually having really dived into and played the system, because it's so different from other things that we've done in the past, exactly how it works. And it's totally understandable that there's a lot of players who are apprehensive. And, you know, I see posts from people who are worried about how much time they're going to have to spend doing garrisons. And, like, it's not clear what they mean by, like, 'cause it's not like you log in and you're like, okay, I'm going to do garrisons for an hour now. Like,
it's not like
you would do dailies.
It's not like it's an instance where you're going to, like, beat a bunch of bosses in there every day, right? Like, we do the invasions, and you can get a weekly invasion that you can do, and we want you to bring your friends over and do it. But if you really like invasions, you could help your friends do their invasions also. And if you want to do them every day, go for it, because you could help your buddy. But you're going to have one once a week, right? That's, like, your chance to get that piece of loot and to get, like, a higher score. So things like that are designed to be available to lots of different types of players.
Yeah, I think like the core player power component of it, through like the buildings and the followers and the mission system and all that, a lot of that really is about offline progression, in the sense of, you know, you send your followers off on a mission, you're interacting with a UI, and then that process is happening while you've logged off, and your actual time investment isn't that large. Where there's a lot of depth is in a lot of the more optional kind of flavor aspects of the different buildings, where you're going out in the world to do things like collecting and taming mounts, or you know, harvesting lumber or whatever else. And those are progressions that you can just do on your own time. I think it's, you know, a good analogy, if you're looking at Mists, is something like comparing the Golden Lotus power progression faction to like the Order of the Cloud Serpent, which you know, was nowhere near as mandatory. It was just, hey, there's this cool reward out there that you can work towards at your own pace whenever you're ready to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. And like, I think that one important thing that we love you guys to address is, obviously there was a preview, and I really want to emphasize the word preview there, of Garrisons back at BlizzCon almost a year ago now. And I think that there's been some perhaps misconceptions about design changes or just generally how the Garrisons work since then. Is there anything that you specifically like to address? Like, I know, for example, there's been a lot of confusion around outposts. Are there any sort of key points that you guys wanted to bring to the conversation about Garrisons right now?
Sure, I think Outposts is a great one, because that's something that is integrated into the leveling. So as people level from 90 to 100, they're going to everyone's essentially going to be exposed to that. It is a system that we clearly have changed since BlizzCon, as we originally envisioned. But the general concept behind that, or the way that works, every zone you have the chance to build a Garrison Outpost. It's a choice of 2 buildings. And each building, whichever one you pick, will send you on a custom quest chain to complete that building. Once the building's completed, you will get a unique bonus that works in that zone from then on out. It'll work during the leveling, anytime you go back, and also at max level. So if there's, like, you know, if you like to do the max level stuff in Nagrand, you probably want to make sure that you finish the building that associates with that. As you do that, once you complete the building and it's done, you'll get a token. And that token can be taken to a vendor in Ashran, and you can trade it in for 1 free building at your garrison. Any building you want. It doesn't have to be the building that you built. I think that's a big misconception, is if I build the Mage Tower in Talador, this is what gives me access to the Mage Tower building in your garrison. It totally doesn't. What it gives you access to is your choice of any blueprint on that vendor for either a single medium or a single large building. And that's something that we changed along the way, mainly because there were a ton of pitfalls, right? Because a player could have, what if they had already built their Mage Tower? And then they get this Mage Tower reward, they're like, oh, like, Blizzard screwed me. Or like, I made the wrong decision. And we talked about a lot of ways to solve that. In the end, anytime a player feels like he made the wrong decision, it's something we want to avoid at all costs, right? That never feels good. And I think we just thought it felt like a cool reward to just give you whatever building you want. And that's essentially how outposts work, right? You'll do that all the way through all the zones as you level up. They're optional, you know, like you can choose to not complete that building if you don't want to do that quest line. Although, the way we built it, the perks are pretty strong. I don't see a lot of people
gold to then get the blueprint, and no one wants to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, in many ways, it's the same way, you know, questing is optional. You can also chain run dungeons if you want to get to 100. But in many ways, the story of Draenor is the story of you raising an army to take on the Iron Horde and building a base and building your outposts. And those choices you make along the way will alter the way the story flows in the individual zones. But it's a very integral part to the at least questing experience.
Yep.
So one big thing that's gotten a lot of changes in Draenor is professions, and we've seen massive changes, including catch-up mechanisms, players with skill level 1 being able to make Draenor quality gear, and even players without a profession crafting gear with the correct garrison building.
Yep.
Sort of what is the role of professions and warlords, and how has your design philosophy for professions changed between myths and warlords?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that garrisons directly affected a massive amount of things that we were going to do with professions. We made a decision pretty early on that it was a great opportunity to shake professions up because we get to build these individual buildings for every profession, right? And actually see a guy there that's working, and you've got a custom building for your alchemy shop. So I think we knew the opportunity was there. The big question was, how would we take advantage of it? It's clearly been a thing that we've put a ton of effort and changes into. I mean, we're still making changes now. We will continue to make, yeah, we'll continue to make changes before the game even launches, right? We've got things that we still need to do. But I think the big key here that really plays into it is the concept of building the building, having work orders, being able to craft items even though you aren't, of that actual profession. A lot of those come from desires that players have talked about over the years. We've heard a lot of times, like, I would love to have a third profession, or I want 4 professions. In the end, I don't think that we necessarily want that, because then everyone it homogenizes, everyone can do more of everything. I think it kind of feels cooler when you have your own identity, like you are a blacksmith miner, maybe that's your thing. The garrison gives you the opportunity to have an alchemy shop, right? And now you can make potions. Can you make the best potions that an alchemist can make? No. Can you make potions that are pretty cool, that are, almost there, maybe 80% is good? Yes, you totally can. And for most players, I think that's going to be an exciting, fun experience. So I think we really looked to what were some of the core kind of fantasies that we could do here. Could my profession skill up and get better while I'm not necessarily in the game playing every day? And I think that's where the offline progression of the work orders really comes in. I can go out, collect a bunch of reagents, turn them in, and then convert those into things to help me make more items. That's really, that's what we were chasing. Clearly, there's a lot of details that come in to have to fill in, and we're just going to watch it closely. We know it's a system that's seeing dramatic change for this expansion.
Yeah, I think two of the guiding principles there are that the actual craftsperson themselves should feel better than the person who only just has the building, like Cory said. Whether you're an alchemist, a blacksmith, the person with just the building, the smith, can make many items, but not the very best ones. The flip side then is that if you are that craftsperson and you build that building, it's an efficiency increase.
Yeah,
it's not mandatory to, make things, but you're just going to be more efficient about how many materials and how quickly you can make them.
It can feel more convenient, right?
Yeah. So is that the efficiency increase, is that really the only profession, is that really the only perk which people who have taken the time to level up a profession have? I know we've seen in the data that there are things like they can make a slightly higher item level or quality level of gear. Are there any other benefits to actually taking the time to level a profession up to max over just getting the right buildings?
Well, what the building does is it's also going to let you craft things faster if you are of the same profession, right? Because you're going to be able to get double of the daily cooldown of that item. So like if you're a blacksmith and you have a blacksmithing building, that's still going to be a benefit to you. And that was, obviously on purpose, because we wanted that person to still feel excited. Because otherwise, you've been a blacksmith for like 6 years and you love blacksmithing. And then it's like, well, building my blacksmithing building is dumb. Because shouldn't I take something else? Like, why would I build that building? So I think that was the concept there, is that if you are a smith, you should feel really awesome about building the blacksmith building and getting the benefit of not only getting to make the highest level items, but you'll be able to make those items faster.
And also by removing the stat bonuses from having the various crafting professions that sort of forced everybody into one of them just for a player power reason, we've really focused the profession gameplay on crafting, and that's ultimately an economic interaction, right? Being the best blacksmith or tailor or enchanter, it's about the economic yield. And so there's really 2 components to that, right? There's being able to make higher quality goods, and that's the thing that you get for actually having that trade skill in your character. And there's being able to make more of them or to make them faster, which is what you get from the building interaction. So the person who has both is going to be the most powerful for crafter, so to speak, in the sense of, their economic power.
And for outside of that, there's one thing that always gets overlooked, I think, in this whole thing, which is there's a really cool set of benefits at level 2 of all the buildings that are kind of they're obvious. They're not the kind of thing that's like, oh man, you get to make like a much higher level item, but they're things that add flavor to all the buildings. So like engineers, for example, can get a selection of 5 different toys every day if you get your engineering building to level 2. Like on tailoring, you can make standards, and you can take these standards out in the world and throw them down, and they'll grant a benefit to you and other people around you. It's things like that across the board. All the profession buildings have something like that at level 2 that's more of like a flavor perk. You get a free potion every day from the alchemy shop at level 2. You know, I think when people think professions, they instantly think, you know, right away, how can I make the highest level item that's going to get me better items in some other part of the game? But I think professions are a place that have a ton of opportunity to add flavor to WoW outside of just the fact that you can make a higher item level piece.
Yeah, I know a lot of users are concerned that they see in the tooltip Warlords crafted 3 on items, meaning that you can only equip 3 crafted items at once across all professions. Can you shed some insight into why this change was made? Because some users are concerned that it makes all the professions compete against each other.
To some extent, but it also makes all the professions much more powerful.
Yep.
It lets us make much stronger crafted gear than we otherwise could, because part of the concern, without that limit, there's sort of an upper bounds on how good we would feel comfortable making that gear, given how and how much of it we would feel comfortable making available. Because we don't want, for example, the person who only does Raid Finder to be in a situation where literally 100% of their quote-unquote best-in-slot gear is something they should get off the auction house with gold. And that there's really no content they can do that's going to give them better stuff than that. Whereas with a equipped limit, we can say, okay, actually, yes, pick 3 slots. Those slots will be the best things that you can get, and you can go after them with crafting, or make them, or otherwise, but then you still have reasons to interact with our other systems and to want to go kill a raid boss or get some more PvP gear or what have you.
That makes perfect sense. And so moving on quickly, we've got a little bit of time left. We want to get as many questions into you guys as possible. Hitting on the legendary quest line, this is something a lot of people have asked us about. They appear pretty similar on the surface between Mists of Pandaria and Warlords of Draenor. Like, you know, both span the expansion, feature solo and group content. Is there anything that you've learned or taken on board from the Mists of Pandaria legendary? And what changes, including like things like the pacing, the RNG drops, things like Test of Valor? What amendments can we see? Oh, Battlegrounds, yeah, that's a very good one. What changes can we expect for the legendary quest line between Mists and Warlords?
A few things. So I think first off, it'll be introduced to you much sooner. You actually begin this for the quest line before you even hit max level. I think at level 98 or so, you'll be sent into
Garrison.
Into Skyreach, and you'll kind of get the expectation of, okay, I have this awesome ring. It's probably the best thing I'm going to have in one of my ring slots. One nice thing about the ring is that it's not completely obsoleting that item slot for the rest of the expansion, like the cloak did in some cases. We don't have to worry about dropping cloaks in raids, and no one wants them. But yeah, I think in terms of the actual progression, probably not going to have a mandatory win a battleground step. I think there is something to be said for PvP integration and for encouraging players to experience different playstyles. I think specifically the win a battleground was not the greatest choice for the Mists legendary, because often it felt very out of your control, particularly if it wasn't a type of gameplay that you enjoyed. You could be doing everything that you wanted and just happen to, if our win rates are 50-50, you could queue 8 times in a row and lose all 8. And that was inevitably mathematically going to happen to a large number of people, and that's not a great experience. And then as far as the drop acquisition steps, I think we learned that things like Secrets of the Empire, needing to collect a larger number of things that drop more frequently overall works better than a smaller number of things that are rarer, just in terms of, again, variance and the feeling of bad RNG and how long you can go without the reasonable expectation of completing your item. But overall, we're happy with how the Mists legendary worked, and there'll be a lot of similarities.
Especially structure-wise. Yeah. I think we loved the structure that we were able to update at every patch along the way, and there was always a little bit of something new for you to do. I think that original idea came about of, could we come up with something that you could do from patch to patch that would feel connected, that would always have upgrades, and it could really give us a chance to tell a story that you otherwise might just forget about once that patch is over. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a bit sad how it all will be gone now, because people can't really catch up on that story with Rathian and experience all of that lore, but I guess that was a design decision you guys had. Yeah. So
I mean, and it's in many ways, and just to get it out there and make it clear, the ring that you get from working with Khadgar will only be available during Warlords of Draenor.
Yes.
And whenever comes next happens, it's it's a participation reward to some extent.
Yep.
It is a symbol of I was there, I did this, I was part of the story.
You've been playing all along.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
You know.
Will we see old school legendaries and warlords? I know there used to be some discussion about that, like bringing back drops from specific bosses, or is that still a scratch for now?
Possibly. I think this legendary design is not mutually exclusive with wanting to do the more traditional, like there's a weapon for one specific class or one subset of classes that comes from a raid or what have you, and that's just a decision we'll make as we come to it.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So we wanted to grab a couple of questions from the Twitch chat, which has been extremely active. So really, really quickly.
Thank you, guys.
No, yeah, thanks for the questions, Twitch. I know you wanted to grab this first one, so far away.
Cool. So we have Sailor Jimmy via Twitch. Class Quest, will we see more of them? The Greenfire quest received an amazing reception, and he would like to see more class quests or legendaries to add more of a sense of personal accomplishment.
Class quests are something that it essentially comes up every expansion that we, to do something like that. I think the main reason we don't is because the investment that it takes to make a class quest like that for every class across the game would dramatically reduce what we could do for the actual questing that everyone gets to experience. Whereas if we look at 1/13 of the population gets to do this one thing in this one patch, I think that's a tough decision for us to make versus let's add that same number of quests to a max level 100 area that everyone could do. So a lot of those things, it just comes down to where can we spend our bucks to do that in the right way.
That said, it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
I think the Warlock Greenfire Questline set a good precedent in that regard.
Yep.
When we have something cool that we want to give away where it makes sense, I think it's, setting the precedent of not everyone has to have one.
Yeah.
You didn't bring one for everyone in the class, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, it gives us the freedom to do that without needing to commit to, wait, if Warlocks get one, everyone needs to get one.
Yeah,
So
and even though Proving Grounds doesn't have a lore angle, it's still that's a challenge that you can do that is
on a class level. Exactly. All right, very last question, and this one has been coming up from so many different Twitch people that I don't even know who to attribute it to, so I'm not going to even try. I know that this isn't you guys' specific wheelhouse, but we have had so many questions. You know what's coming, don't you? I can see Cory's face. You know what's coming. Models. So this is the first time that the player base at large has had their characters transformed. I think that the Barbershop edition was awesome and huge and is allowing a lot of people to pick out some new faces if they're not satisfied. Do you know whether they're still being worked on and whether we can expect ongoing changes? And do you have any idea on the progress of Blood Elves?
Blood Elves are in progress. It's definitely something that we're working on. It wasn't the plan to. They just didn't make it. For launch. We are totally doing Blood Elves. They will be out as soon as possible. Whichever patch that they come in. But as soon as we get them done, just like all the other classes or races, they'll come out. They're not going to get left behind. As far as updates and changes, I mean, that's just a matter of us watching feedback. We're not just going to be like anything else in WoW. I don't think we just feel like it's done. Clearly, we'll watch feedback and have to get updates. Chris Robinson's our art director. He's clearly pretty in-depthly involved with all of the races across the board and the changes that have been happening. But at a certain point, we have to lock them down and get the game ready to ship and actually get it out there. We'll get more feedback at that point, and then we'll just figure out what we want to do from there. I don't think we can identify exactly anything that we know of today that's going to be changed, because part of that just comes from our community. That's really the way WoW works.
Yeah, and I think it's likely. My guess would be that changes would often come in the form of more options, because we know that the face that someone can't stand is the face that someone else loves.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's going to be no one.
That's where the barbershop helps
to fix that one face. But letting people feel like they can at least customize their character to kind of express the personality, the overall feel that they had in mind when they chose that character. Exactly.
Yeah, precisely that. Well, I think that is us out of time. Thank you again so much, Ian and Cory, for joining us. So you can follow Ian and Cory on WatcherDev and Mumper. They are underneath the two guys in their little panel over there. You can follow me on Twitter at Olivia D. Grace, Peculiar on Twitter at Peculiar, again, beneath our screens as ever. You can follow Wowhead on Wowhead. And thank you again so much to you two guys for coming and joining us for what I hope was a useful and fun experience. And thank you so much as well to Zaheim and to Nita for setting all of this up. You guys have been amazing.
Yeah, all of you guys are awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much indeed for...
Yeah, it was fun.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you so
Thanks
much to Chat Room for coming along. This will be posted up live on Wowhead tomorrow morning as a YouTube video. And until then, we will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.